The Royal Arsenal, why is it here? Well, we'll do that through maps. Here's the entrance, of course, that's a good way to go in. So let's go and have a look now at a map of South East England. Up there, as you can see, there is the patch of land occupied by the Royal Arsenal. And the map shows to us what the great advantage of the Royal Arsenal was and why Britain put all of its military industrial assets into this one basket. It's because it's a long way up the River Thames. It's far enough up the River Thames to make it immune to naval bombardments. If you're going to attack the arsenal, you've got to invade the country. Most people didn't want to do that. At the same time, although it's a long way up the Thames, it's also got deep water and it can ship armaments to anywhere in the world as soon as they can be loaded aboard ship. An ideal place for an imperial nation. And, well, there we are. Let's go into South East London. And we see a bounding box, and there is the size of the Royal Arsenal. A lot of people were quite surprised when they see how large it was. Has anybody here ever been to Crossness Pumping Station? Well, Crossness Pumping Station is at the end of the arsenal, just there. So if you've been there, you've been to the end of it. It's over 3 miles from here. The arsenal was a very big factory. In fact, for many decades, it was the largest in the world. It was, and always will be, the largest British factory of all time. Bounding box here. And the reason for that is we're going to select that area and have a look at the physical geography, which is really quite important to this. In fact, I think we'll go in a bit further and see the physical geography like that. And as you can see, there are 4 black spots. This one is Greenwich, the former Palace of Placentia, where Henry VIII was born in, I think it was 1491. Henry VIII then went to Eltham Palace to spend his first 14 years. We know that Henry made his journeys to his various royal palaces, Kew Palace, Richmond Palace, Hampton Court Palace, by water along the Thames, which is perhaps why he came to the throne with an ambition to expand the English Navy, to become one of the best in the world, if not the best. The only problem was England only had 2 decent warships at the time. So he had quite a task on his hands. And to do it, he would need to build new naval dockyards. And the 2 new naval dockyards were at Deptford and Woolwich. Now, Deptford's got an awful lot of space around it. It's a tremendous amount. And you can have to expand that dockyard to a very great extent if necessary. At Woolwich, you can't. But at Woolwich, you have a tremendous advantage, and that is that there is a shelf of chalk, which you can see on this map, that goes straight into the River Thames, just here, and that chalk will give you a firm base to build slipways quickly and easily. Over at Deptford, being on a marsh, there's going to have to be some very considerable civil engineering before you can actually build a ship. Tudor civil engineering was up to that, but it would have taken a long time, and Henry VIII was a man in a hurry. So it was Woolwich which turned out the first ship. Work started on both dockyards in 1512, and the first ship to be launched was in 1516, and with typical Henrican modesty, it was called the Henri Grâce à Dieu. There it is. Henry, by the grace of God in English. Normally referred to as the Great Harry. When this came out of Woolwich Dockyard, it was probably the best warship in the world. It's bristling with guns. It is the first warship ever to be able to deliver a broadside. Both the forecastle and the stern castle have got plenty of guns in them, all the heavier ones at the bottom to give a bit of stability. A lot of guns on this, a lot of ammunition can be carried, a lot of gunpowder can be carried, but there is a problem. None of that ordnance can be laden onto the ship within Woolwich Dockyard. And the reason for that is that the ship is built out of wood, and the wood is bound together by wrought iron. Iron and wood pose a fire hazard, or hot iron. White hot iron and wood pose a fire hazard, and fire and gunpowder do not go down very well together. So it is not possible to arm this or any other ship in the shipyard. The armament has to be done elsewhere. And the Henri Grâce à Dieu had to be sailed 10.5 miles downstream to Erith, where there was a small naval depot. There's nothing wrong with Erith as a naval depot, but it's very difficult for the armourers because they all have to come from the Tower of London, and it's a long way. So, what to do next? And the little map I'm going to show you next explains it. That is the outline of Woolwich Royal Naval Dockyard, or part of it anyway. And the Henri Gracedieu would have been launched right there at the far eastern end of it. In order to make the loading of guns onto vessels easier, more convenient, the Board of Ordnance, the predecessor to the Ministry of Defence, buys a small amount of river frontage here. It's only 150 foot long. It's called the Woolwich Gun Wharf. Its only purpose is to load ships with guns and take guns and ammunition off ships coming in for refit. The opening of that facility there in July 1517 marks the birth of the Royal Arsenal. As time went on, the amount of ships coming out of these new dockyards increased, and the gun wharf was quickly becoming overwhelmed. Not only were ships coming out, ships were going in for refit. All the gunpowder, the cannonballs and the guns all had to be taken off. So the Board of Ordnance eyes this estate here. It's called the Woolwich Warren. Now it belongs to the goldsmith to the City of London. Quite a wealthy man, but it's not very good agricultural land. And the reason it's called the Warren is because he's using it for breeding rabbits in artificial warrens. As a secondary form of income, he is renting this area out to the Board of Ordnance for something called proofing. Down here, you had the camp of the Royal Artillery, as it would become, and all of their guns had to be proofed before they could be used. Proof is a process where you put twice the usual amount of propellant into the gun before firing a blank into a wall of sand. If the gun explodes in this test, it has failed. If the gun does not explode in this test, it is taken away for a great deal of further examination, and if no fissures, cracks or anything else can be found, then and only then can it be passed on to the armed services. Let's have a look at this in conjunction with today's map, today's plan. There you are, that's it. Now you might notice from this, it's not a rather low contrast map, but we're not actually in this area. We're actually slightly outside it. I'll have to look around to do it. We're about there. Let's have a look inside the Woolwich Warren, see what the Board of Ordnance got in 1670 when they bought it. They bought it for a very considerable sum of money, and also they gave the goldsmith who owned it the existing Woolwich Gun Wharf. So we still had a presence in Woolwich. Well, there we are. This is the beginnings of the Royal Arsenal on its existing site, and there are three structures. Up here, Prince Rupert's Fort. You can ignore it. It was destroyed not long after 1670. It was superseded. Its purpose was to provide gunnery protection against any vessels that might come along to bombard Woolwich or Deptford dockyards. It won't be around for much longer, so we can't ignore it, and I can assure you that the Museum of London have found that it has left no trace at all. Nothing there. But there are two buildings that are bought by the Board of Ordnance when they get this land. A very small water mill down here, which is of no use to them, and that's quickly demolished, and the estate's main house, a small Tudor mansion called Tower Place, which looked like this. Now, as you can see, it's got a tower. The purpose of the tower is purely to give a nice view, nothing else. It's just purely an ornament. And the Board of Ordnance reckon this might make some fairly good offices for them, but we'll see about that. But that's all we got. That's all they had at the beginning of their purchase of the Woolwich Warren. But things would change in a little bit later in the 1690s as they moved more and more and more of their functions from the Tower of London into Woolwich, and eventually Woolwich would take over from the Tower of London entirely. Right, it's the same map, but we've now got this. It's a quadrangle with two ranges of buildings either side of it. Now what I'm going to do now is go through some of the existing buildings and put them into some historical content. You may well recognise these buildings, so you should hopefully have a sort of see a correlation between this and what you see today in the Royal Arsenal. This quadrangle was called the Royal Laboratory, and it was designed by the great architect Nicholas Hawksmoor. Sir Christopher Wren's clerk of works on the building of St Paul's Cathedral. Here's a picture of it. The Royal Laboratory's purpose is twofold. One, it is to blend new types of gunpowder, and perhaps more importantly, to test English gunpowder against foreign gunpowder, because we have to make sure that we've got the best. We might be at war with the other people, you never know. As you can see, the building comprises of two ranges of buildings either side, and in the middle you've got these two pavilions which are somewhat higher. These are the actual chemical laboratories. At the northern end of the quadrangle, you've got ornamental gates, two gate piers. One has a lion on it and the other one has a unicorn on it. At the far end, there is a clock tower on top of a rather ornamental gate. Let's have a look inside it. There we are. That's looking from south to north. You can see the tower of Tower Place there. Here are the two pavilions, and in the foreground there are people grinding cannonballs into a perfectly spherical shape, giving them a wash and then rolling them along, having inspected them and putting them into pyramidal piles. These would have been made locally actually, as the British iron industry at this time was centred almost entirely in Kent and Sussex. Let's turn around, looking in the opposite direction. There's the clock tower on top of its gateway, various people shifting cannonballs and boxes of gunpowder around. And now let's have a look inside the chemical laboratory itself. And there we are, people in 17th century protective clothing, blending and testing gunpowder. It's a really very important building. The Royal Laboratory had actually been established for a very long time, but up until the time this building was built, the only thing that it did was make ornamental fireworks for the entertainment of the royal family. Now it was involved in industry and technology. One more look at this. In ye olden days, again, it's from the northern end of it, and there you can see the ornamental gateway with the lion and the unicorn on top. This illustration must have been made after 1720, because that building wasn't there in 1695 when this lot was built. Now, in 1855, the Royal Laboratory's central courtyard was roofed over so it could become an engineering workshop, and it was in fact the largest covered workshop in the world at the time. That's the interior of it. They are making various ammunition components. But by the 1960s, it'd been abandoned and looked like that. You see there is some rudimentary heating now. This is looking from south to north. The north end of it has got some glazing in it now. The lion, the unicorn and their ornamental gate have gone. Or have they? We shall see. A couple of looks at the outside of it. Firstly, this is the early 1950s. So the range, you can see the pavilion in the middle, but it has lost its roof now. It's all looking a bit sad for itself now. We'll go on until the 1970s, where it's been cleaned up a little bit, but don't worry, the MOD aren't going to keep it. Believe it or not, up until really quite recently, up until the 1990s, no defence building could be listed by English Heritage or Historic England. You could theoretically have knocked down any defensive building you liked. There's no listing, no statutory protection at all. And therefore the MOD decided it wanted a car park and did this. It got rid of all of the entire lot except for the two pavilions in the middle, which was really tragic. I mean, these buildings are dated from 1695, built by a great architect, Nicholas Hawksmoor. Having removed the ranges from either side, inevitably there's a lack of support for the buildings and they began to fall down. So they had to be braced up. This photograph is taken around about 1990. The state that these buildings got into by the time the Ministry of Defence moved out is one of the reasons why Barclay Group very nearly did not buy the Royal Arsenal. Because once the Ministry of Defence had moved out, these buildings were listed, and that put Barclay or any other owner under an onus to repair them. And as you can see, it's going to be quite a task. Well, Barclays did that task, and that's what they look like now, except that there's now a block of flats here. Fairly tasteful and quite similar to that. So there you go, that's the Royal Laboratory, the first ordnance building built in the Royal Arsenal by the Board of Ordnance in 1695. Let me clear up something about the term Royal Arsenal. and the term Woolwich Arsenal. The Woolwich Arsenal existed for maybe 30 seconds in 1820. It was the Woolwich Warren until 1820. The King came along to see why and how so much money was being spent. He offered the Master General of the Ordnance a gift in the form of saying, you may now call this the Woolwich Arsenal and not the Woolwich Warren, which would be more sensible. The Master General of the Ordnance retorted, in honour of yourself, sir, your Majesty, I think we should call it the Royal Arsenal. The King agreed immediately, and therefore it was the Woolwich Arsenal for only about 20 seconds. The Woolwich Arsenal is a railway station. It's not this. Let's have a look behind this, have a look at the garden inside. This is looking at the other pavilion if you look inside, and there, let's see it. So Barclays has done quite a nice job here. Pretty good. Back to the map. Now, moved on to 1720, we've got two more buildings. This one here and this one here. These are the two most important buildings in the Royal Arsenal from a historical point of view, because they mark the beginning of manufacturing. There's no manufacturing in the Royal Laboratory, merely testing and grinding things into a finished state, but this is different. By 1700, the favoured material for making cannons was bronze, and there was one foundry that seemed to be better at making these guns than any other. It was Bagley's Foundry in Moorfields, near King's Cross. The Board of Ordnance gave this firm a monopoly, and in 1715, a very important man from the Board of Ordnance, Major Beauregard, took a delegation there to watch a gun being cast, at which point the factory exploded, killing Mr. Bagley, all of his staff, and very badly injuring Major Beauregard, who did make a complete recovery, but there was now no expertise in the field of making bronze cannon. The Board of Ordnance made a very brave choice. They decided to bring the whole process in-house. Now, that I can assure you it's possible to give an hour's talk on how bronze cannon are made. Don't worry, I'm not going to do it. But it's a very complex process, and the Board of Ordnance were very brave to take it on. Now, this is a picture of the building that they built. It was designed by Sir John Vanbrugh, and I can tell you that this was taken between 1772 and 1799. That's when this was done, and this illustration was made by Paul Sandby, founder of the Royal Academy, father of English landscape watercolours, and the Royal Arsenal's artist in residence. You can see the building. Doesn't look like a factory. It looks quite ornate, really, but that's what it is. It's in fact a foundry. It's where you pour molten bronze into moulds, and out come things that look like cannons. It's 1,000 times more complicated than that, but we haven't got the time, unfortunately. Let's have a look inside it. This photograph is relatively recent. It's not a very good photograph. It's not an official photograph, but it does show you what the inside looks like. You can see it's got railway lines in it. The Victorians were very enthusiastic about putting railways into the arsenal. They have a huge network. And that iron hoop over that archway there does have some significance. But firstly, let's turn ourselves around, and you can have a look at the rather nice spiral staircase that's inside it. The whole building was beautifully restored by an organisation called English Partnerships, which is the body that transferred the arsenal from state to private use. Here you've got the name of the various master gun founders over the years. One at the top from 1717 is Andreas Schultz. He was succeeded by Jan and Peter Verbruggen down here. And then you have a series of other ones all the way around here until you get to the last one, Mr. Eccles, until the factory closed down in 1855 and was then handed over to the Royal Laboratory. Before that, it had been part of the Royal Gun Factory. Let's have a look at the outside in 1885, and we can see one of the locomotives running around here. It hasn't changed very much, this building. And now I think we'll go on all the way up to the 1950s when this has become a garage. The building was so important historically that the Arsenal didn't dare demolish it. Nobody dared turn this into a car park, but they did put the Arsenal's chief superintendent's car inside it. And here you are, Ordnance Factory Garage up there. And outside you've got the two prototype Centurion tanks, easily the best tank in the world in the early 1950s, and they were made here. And the Royal Arsenal was very proud of them. As you can see, they're showing them off somewhat. Let's have a look at that building today. Anybody recognise it? Yeah, it's still there. It is now the document store of the National Maritime Museum. So when you decide to build your wooden model of the Henri Gracedieu, you have to go there to get your drawings. Well, actually you won't, because it's a controlled environment, and they send them off to Greenwich. You collect them from there, borrow them, look at them, scan them, whatever, and then they go back to there. We're going to get on to the building next door to it. It's all very well turning out things that look like bronze cannons out of this building, but it's just a lump of brass. You've got to bore a hole into it. You've got to bore a tube down the casting in order to put in the gunpowder and the cannonball. So a new building is needed for this as well. And by the hand of Nicholas Hawksmoor, there it is. I wonder if any of you recognise it already. This is a building whose first name was the Great Pile of Buildings, believe it or not. That's actual name. It would later become known as Dial Square, when the clock mounted in the middle here failed and it had to be replaced with a sundial because it was more reliable. What went on inside this was the turning of the gun barrels in order to bore holes in them like this. This is a painting by Jan Verbruggen, the second master gun founder. He's a very, very fine artist. The gun barrel here is being rotated. It's going around horizontally, and somebody here is gradually turning a wheel which will force a cutting implement into it until it is bored almost all the way through, one end to the other. That is the gun complete. It can now be proof tested, and if it doesn't explode, it will go off to the Army or the Navy. Rotary motion in 1720. No electric motors, no steam engines. So how did they get it? Well, this illustration by Isaac Landman a few years later gives a rough idea. Horsepower, turning around a central gear wheel here, turns around a cogwheel here, and the shaft running into the building rotates the cannon. This shows the principle, but it's not actually accurate, because all this lot is actually underground. It's in brick chambers, and the shafting running up to where the cannon is in little tunnels about that high. And they're all still there now. The block of flats built on the site has had to have its foundations quite carefully adjusted to accommodate the survival of all this equipment. By the way, Isaac Landman's son, George, went on to be the designer of the London and Greenwich Railway. Now, the building was very important, so it was decided not to knock it down, even after it had used up its usefulness. It is, by the way, the place where Arsenal Football Club was invented. Here's a photo in the early 1950s, and there's the side of the building, seeing how the Victorians had gone over the rear part of the quadrangle with some more engineering workshops. Lastly, what I'm sure you will recognise what it is today. There you go. Yeah? I thought you might know that. Yeah. I was there on opening day. There they are, the Royal Brass Foundry and Dial Square, now the Dial Arch Pub, the two most important historical buildings in the Royal Arsenal. The Royal Brass Foundry is Grade 1 listed. It's one of only 3 Grade 1 listed industrial buildings in South East London, the other 2 being Crossness Pumping Station and Tower Bridge. And there, the former Turnary, the former engineering workshop, Dial Square, which is Grade 2 star listed, which isn't not quite as good as Grade 1, but not far from it. So you can't knock either of them down ever. They're immortal. Let's go back to the map, see how we've got on. There we are. Right, that's the situation we've arrived at. We've got the Royal Laboratory, the Brass Foundry, the Turnary for engineering guns, the Dial Square, and you've got, once again, Tower Place. Let's have another quick look at it. Now, this is what the Board of Ordnance moved into when they started to transfer from the Tower of London. The problem is, though, that bedrooms do not make very good offices, and nor do sculleries. This is a domestic house. What they really wanted was an office block. I mean, these people are, after all, the Ministry of Defence. So they go to Nicholas Hawksmoor in 1720 and say, please knock down Tower Place and build something more useful to us. And this is the result. The tower is kept because it gives everybody a nice view. There's no other reason. And the new building, the office block, is built on the foundations of the original house. Indeed, it's likely that the original bricks were reused to build this. The building comprises of two large rooms on the ground floor. The one on the left is the Royal Military Academy. That's now Sandhurst, which covers 600 acres. The room on the right is the Ministry of Defence, the boardroom of the Board of Ordnance. The Ministry of Defence is a bit bigger than this as well now these days. From little acorns, mighty oaks do grow. It hasn't changed much over the years, except internally. The ground floor of it has hardly changed one iota. It's still very, very much the same as it was when it was built in 1720. Although the upper floor was turned into the officers' mess for a while in the 1960s, and that didn't look quite so appropriate somehow. Here's another picture of it, showing, again, the Arsenal showing off one of its smaller steam locomotives. Glazing on the left is the glazing that was put into the north end of the Royal Laboratory, which caused the line, the unicorn and the ornamental gate to go. Don't want to scrap lines and unicorns, do we? So there they are. They've been put back up on this building instead, those two there. And the next photograph will prove that they're still there. Unfortunately, the unicorn has had his horn chopped off, but other than that. The building on the right is a building that was built in 1878. It's a bullet factory. Bullets aren't very big. You need a lot of light to make them. A lot of precision is involved, and therefore you've got a lot of glazing. I'm not going to go over this building or the rest of the quadrangle that it's part of. Suffice to say that the other three sides were built in 1805 and 1810 as a riposte to the threat of Napoleon Bonaparte. This bit at the front became the Greenwich Heritage Centre, one of the best local history museums in London, until the Royal Borough of Greenwich callously and disgracefully closed it at about 3 weeks' notice. And they will never be forgiven for it. Back to the map, and we can see how the arsenal is expanding. Things are getting bigger. I've moved ahead quite a bit now, 1777. This is the boundary of the original Woolwich Warren. This is a further extension out here, and by 1777 it's got all the way out here. The next map will show you the part of the riposte to Napoleon Bonaparte. There we are. Two very large new buildings have arrived. Napoleon Bonaparte was a military genius. He was a very, very serious threat to this country, and he made it quite clear that he intended to invade. So Britain answered with a massive amount of expenditure on its military. Two buildings. The Royal Carriage Department here, it's a quadrangle with three open-sided sheds standing in the middle. Even more impressive, the Grand Store. The Grand Store was originally going to be on the other side of the river, the idea being that the Thames would serve as a moat if Napoleon's forces did get this far. The Grand Store would have contained everything that the army and parts of the navy could possibly have wanted to use. Well, the ground on the other side of the river was found not to be capable of withstanding the weight, and therefore it was built over on this side. Let's have a look at the Grand Store, this Royal Carriage Department first. We're going to start off with some pretty late photographs of it. This one here was taken in the 1970s actually, and you can see that it has a large corrugated iron ziggurat roofed box put on the top of it. It's not very pretty. We'll come to why they did that in a minute. Next one, same thing from a different angle. And now onto the interior. On the interior was roofed over in 1878 to make a covered workshop area. And there it is. This is what it made. Anything that the military could want that was on wheels, literally anything, or for that matter, anything made out of wood. They would have made furniture in here as well as gun carriages, limbers, carts, what have you. The next photo shows you some of the woodworking side of it. There we are. And the next photograph will take us over into the metalworking side of it. There we go. Notice that there is a railway. There are railways everywhere in the Royal Arsenal. Their enthusiasm was almost fanatical. The factory evolved technologically very well over its life to the extent that it automated wheel production. And there you are. This is a still taken from a 1916 film made in the Arsenal. You can see it's a hydraulically operated press that will construct a wheel in one go. Wood had fallen out of favour as a military material by the end of the First World War, both Army and Navy were much more interested in having steel as a material. And therefore, majority of this building laid fallow after the First World War, until in the mid-1930s, when it appeared that we were going to have another war with Germany, it was decided to convert this into a general purpose engineering workshop, and a very large one. Now that's a typical scene. This one's about 1953. It's inside the building, and that girder at the top is actually a crane run. A bridge, a movable bridge, will run across the building like that, running on rails on the top of there. And the bridge will have lifting gear on it, and it can lift things in and out, up and down. This gadget here is called a planer. I won't explain it, but I can assure you that they can be quite dangerous, actually. Here's another function going on in the same building. Again, you can see the big roof on the top. Now, the story is that when Historic England got into the arsenal after 1994, they listed everything, including that big grey corrugated iron roof on the top. It's not very pretty. That's the interior, another shot of the interior after closure. The brickwork is there as an air raid precaution. It's to protect the vertical columns. Now, Barclays felt obliged to replace the large corrugated iron roof with something similar. And the result is this, which you will probably recognise. People within Barclays have told me that they don't regard this as their finest hour. But, you know, that's another story. There's a clock tower. You notice that the clock tower has got vents in it. It's because it's not only a clock tower, it's also a bell tower. The bells have been disconnected. Let's have a look at the clock, just for fun. There it is. That was taken in the 1990s, actually. The clock used to be driven by weights going down into wells, but now it's been restored. It's electrically powered. We saw two very large buildings appearing in about 1810. And the other one is the Grand Store. Let's take a look at that. There it is, on the left. That's the Grand Store, on the left, designed by James and Lewis Wyatt. Very well-known architects, specialists in the construction of mansions and stately homes. And that building reflects that. You might notice here there is a tower. We're going to make use of that tower later on. So try and keep that in your mind. It's what's called a hydraulic accumulator tower. On the left, we've got the Duke of Wellington. Let's have a look at him. There he is, crest of the Board of Ordnance above him up there. That statue is about 3 minutes walk from where we're sitting right now, maybe 2 minutes walk. It's in the middle of the park on top of the car park. Unfortunately, sometime during its life, he's lost the end of his right arm since this photograph was taken, and he's also lost all the fingers off his left hand. Let's have another look at the central offices, this time from Building 22, the headquarters building, the Arsenal's headquarters building. There's the Arsenal's power station. Here's the Grand Store down here. Now, you'll probably realise that in order to build the power station, they've had to knock down part of the Grand Store. They didn't. It fell down. There we are. This is in the late 1960s, about 68, this one. And here, these are also taken in 1968. You can see the interior being adapted for its new purpose. It's going to be the bookstore for the British Library. Not something it was suitable for, and it didn't last in that field for very long. Both these buildings survived, you can see here, but not the one in the background there. Now look at the interior. Made out of wood. Next one. Wood again. And now the heating supply for the Grand Store. If you're familiar with it, you know it's a very big building. And that is the entirety of its heating. That's the Great Stove, which is still there today. It's not very big. I think I'll come up to about there on it. So, you know, it's not very large. Now, one more photo from ye olden days. And there you can see the power station being demolished. The Arsenal has ceased manufacturing in 1967, so it doesn't need its power station anymore. So that's being demolished. And now on to what it looks like today, which you may recognise. The power station has been replaced by Building 50, just here. This is the building that really caused Barclays to think twice about buying the Royal Arsenal. The reason that the part of it that's under what is now Building 50 fell down is because this building, The design of this building by James and Lewis Wyatt was accepted by the Board of Ordnance, and then they went over to Parliament to get the money. When Parliament realised how expensive it was going to be, they refused. So the Board of Ordnance had to cheapen the method of construction considerably, and they did it by deleting the foundations. The foundations were replaced with wooden piles, telegraph poles sunk into the ground, totally inadequate. The building had started to collapse within 5 years of its completion in 1810. It's always been on light duties ever since. When the arsenal closed in 1994, it got listed immediately, and Barclays realised that they were going to have to pay for permanent repairs to this building if they were going to get the arsenal. And that is why they negotiated with the ministries, and that is why they only paid £1 for the Royal Arsenal. That's all they paid for it, just £1. The building has been restored to perfection. This is Barclay Group's masterpiece. It is now sitting on a concrete slab. It will never fall down. And the interior has been converted from warehouse into residential with the loss of nothing. It is a brilliant piece of work. So well done, Barclays. They did a really good job there. Back to the map for a minute, and now something tremendous happens. The Royal Carriage Department builds the world's largest forge to make metal components for its carriages. That doesn't last very long, but the important thing about it is that this is the site of this building. So we are here. There we go. Right, it's the end of this series of maps. I'm going to use a different one now. Slightly larger. This has got the 2 phases so far on it. Take a look at this red line here. I'll briefly go back to the previous one. That's that line there. That's the red line there. So we're going into smaller scale maps now. And that's the outline of the original Woolwich Warren estate. 2 more buildings. I'm just going to show you 2 more buildings, and then we're going to go around the arsenal at large, the bits that aren't here anymore. Both of these buildings represent a revolution in armaments in 1856. This one is called the Armstrong Gun Factory, and this one is called the Shell Foundry. We'll start outside the Armstrong Gun Factory and we'll see Mallet's mortar, the largest caliber weapon ever made. Very large rounds of ammunition. Now you know why ammunition is in rounds. It's because they're round. See, there's a reason, it really is. Now, we don't really want to look at Mallet's mortar. It just gives us an idea of what the building looked like behind. There it is. That's the Armstrong Gun Factory, and given the paucity of really good photographs of the front of it in ye olden days in 1856, I'll use a steel cut. There it is. That's the Armstrong Gun Factory. A 90-ton crane here will be uprated to 110 tons soon, and it's lifting a 41-ton gun. These are all Armstrong guns. They're made out of wrought iron, a revolutionary material for the making of guns, so much stronger than cast iron or bronze. It's capable of increasing the range of a gun vastly by using this material. About 1970. It's got new vents on the roof, and they give it its then new use, and its current use for that matter. It was turned into an archive for the Royal Navy. All of the Royal Navy's paper documents were stored in this building. It's therefore it has a controlled environment within. It's been an archive ever since. Currently it's HIMAG, which is the world's largest magazine archive. Another historic photo taken outside with a 41-ton gun. They're very proud of that by the looks of them. But behind of it, in an unfinished state, is something even better. As always for the Arsenal, every time they wanted to show off a big gun, they always put their smallest gun outside as well. That's the 7-pounder, and you'll see it again later on. The thing behind it isn't yet finished is this. This is the 81-ton gun. This was considered to be an engineering wonder of the world when it came out in the early 1880s. Armed with this, the Royal Navy had no threat from anyone else at all, because nobody could get within range. These guns had so much more range than anybody else's that, well, you know, the enemy would be gone before they could get within range themselves. One last old photo of the outside of it. This is the big crane. It's been moved to the other end of the building. It's now been uprated to 110 tonnes. And here it's got the hydraulic accumulator tower. What is a hydraulic accumulator tower? It's a battery, effectively. Inside here is a tall vertical tube. Lodged within the tube very tightly, there is a piston. On top of the piston, there are a lot of cast iron weights, and they pressurise the water within to 1,500 pounds per square inch. To operate the crane, all you need to do is open the valve at the bottom and the crane will work. There is a central power station, but these things were dotted around the arsenal just in case the power station had to be turned off for any reason. Here it is today. That's what you will see now. And if we go right to the end of it, I'll show you its little secret. There we go. It's an emergency telephone, and it's the last one. There were hundreds and hundreds of these dotted over the arsenal. This is, to my knowledge, the very last, well, I know it is the very last survivor. There may have one time been 1,000. If you used it, you asked for the service you required, and then a blue light came on at the top, so as they came racing to the scene, they'd be able to see exactly where you were. Next door to the Armstrong gun factory, which turned out these revolutionary guns, you had the Shell Foundry. Up until now, we've been using cannonballs, but cannonballs have their limitations. What you really want is what's in use today, which is canisters, which they've got pointy ends to them. These are called shells because they're hollow. And this is the building that is going to make them. It's a steel factory. It's a full-scale steelworks going into the arsenal. The now obsolete cannonballs are packed up in front of it. The cannonballs will actually be melted down and turned into a form of railway track for use in the arsenal. This was taken in 1856 when the buildings were being constructed. And by the way, the Armstrong gun factory and the Shell Foundry were designed by a man called David Murray, who was not an architect, he was an engineer, but he did a good job. There is the Shell Foundry gatehouse, and that is still there, very close to where we are now. Let's have a look inside. It's quite photogenic. This is the finished product side of it. And I'm pretty certain I know what some of these castings are. They're parts for a Centurion tank, and that would date this to the early 1950s. Here we are, a bit more inside it. This is the cleaner parts of this building. It was an absolutely filthy building. This is the part of the cast iron store. Lumps of cast iron are coming in, probably from the northeast of England. This building will convert them into steel, which is quite a nice process to look at, which is why the arsenal's photographer, Mr. Eccles, photographed it quite a bit. You fill up this vessel here with cast iron, with molten cast iron, I might point out, and then you blast air through it, comes through this tube here. This ignites the carbon, and all of the carbon comes out in a nice big shower of flame, and your end result is steel. There we are. There's someone else, and I think we've got one more of this lot. Now the next photograph, believe it or not, is not fanciful. Ladies in long gowns going into the Shell Foundry to watch the steel converters at work. The Royal Arsenal didn't become secret until the mid-1880s. Magazines and newspapers published guided walking tours of how to walk through the Royal Arsenal. You could get into the buildings, and it became quite the thing to do for elegant people to stroll through factories. And there you are. There's a rather nice painting of it. The Shell Foundry gates are probably the most famous part of the building and one of the few bits that survive. There are the staff at the end of the First World War sitting outside them, and of course they have the obligatory mallets mortar rounds here, and this is what it looks like today. The gates on here, which are very ornamental, were cast by the Regent's Canal Iron Foundry, who specialised in this sort of thing. Quite a few gates like this, or similar, around London, if you know where to look. They were taken away at one point when the arsenal closed to manufacturing in 1967, but eventually the last chief superintendent of the Royal Arsenal became the managing director of the Royal Ordnance Factories and immediately ordered them back. So there we are. Right, it's map time again. Now, we've seen this map before, but as you can see how far it's extending outwards. That canal was built in 1820 as an easterly defensive moat. The arsenal was expanding so fast that it became obsolete quickly because the arsenal just went straight over it. It's got lots of facilities now. It's got a firing range up and down here. This is really nothing compared with what's going to happen in the latter few years of the 19th century. We're going to use a much smaller scale map now. You get that sort of expansion. The red line shows the boundary of the previous map. The arsenal is expanding its railway network to penetrate into the farmland of the Plumstead and Erith marshes. This up here is a small torpedo facility. Britain's torpedoes are all made in the factory down there. And also, it's now got what are called the proof butts. Guns are getting so much larger now that you have to have very specialised facilities for proofing them to fire them into banks of sand. Let's have a quick look at that happening. Here is the 110 gun being tested. Well, it isn't being tested really because it's a very highly posed photograph. But here you can see it in the proof butts. The arsenal is very proudly put up its 2 brand new steam engines at the front there. And what they're doing is they're loading the gunpowder into the gun before the projectile, which is there. So this is complete nonsense. It really is. But it gives you an idea of the sort of things that went on in the proof butts. They lasted for a very long time. Anybody familiar with the 2 big cannons outside of the Imperial War Museum? They would both have been proofed here. And if you can imagine what they sounded like, the people in Plumstead would have to keep their windows open because the concussion would break them. There was a lot of gunnery testing. Right, there's another picture taken at the same time. The little 7-pounder has been put on the top. And it's got dignity written here, and on there you might be able to make out impudence. This huge railway wagon that the 110-ton gun is mounted on is actually number 12 of a series of 20. Number 20 had double the number of wheels. It's a vast machine. And this is how the arsenal moved guns around its own site and also by way of its private train ferry all the way to Essex or Kent for long-range testing. These things are called proof sleighs, and they, there they are, this. And they really do warrant a talk of their own, really. Another look inside the proof butts gives you a better idea of what they look like at the end. For smaller guns, you just bolt them down onto this gridiron and fire them into there. It's got canopies over it. There's piles of sand inside. The canopies prevent the sand going absolutely everywhere. Now, let's move to a map showing what the arsenal looked like at the beginning of the First World War. Much larger. 2 square miles. Nearly all of this expansion has come from the development of high explosive. High explosive is a shortened term for the real name, which is high nitrogen explosive. High explosive is an order of magnitude more powerful than gunpowder, at least. And that means more than 10 times. It's very dangerous. It really is very dangerous, high explosive. This is the new explosives factory, which was started in 1903. Under here, you've got the composition establishment. Now, this is where high explosive is loaded into shell casings, and then the shell casings are fused. Very dangerous work. And for that reason, lots and lots of very small buildings rather than one big one. The idea being, if one of them explodes, there won't be enough explosive in it to detonate the building next door. You get a chain reaction. And the same with the magazines. All of these curious objects here are magazines. A moat on the outside, then an 8-foot high brick wall, then an earthen embankment inside, and in the middle of that, a small flat roof building which contains the high explosive. All of this expansion was necessary due to the introduction of high explosives. But the First World War would put this under a great deal of strain. By 1916, it was quite obvious that the Royal Arsenal just could not keep up with the military's requirement, and so further expansion was necessary, like that. This lot down here, which has just arrived, is what's known as the quick firing cartridge factory. This is where you're using ammunition that looks like the sort of ammunition you'd use in a pistol, only it's very much larger. The shell is pressed into a long casing full of propellant. So to load the gun, all you have to do is put that one component into the gun, Press the button, bang, off it goes, out comes the shell, the casing, you throw it away, and this allows for very rapid fire. The most popular gun used in the First World War by the British Army was the 18-pounder, quick firing gun, and all of its ammunition came from here. The explosives came out of there, they went into here, lots of small little buildings. Once the shells were full up and fused, they were all put into these warehouses down here, ready for removal by rail. Now, during the First World War, the Arsenal's railway system was exchanging 1,300 wagons per day with the mainline network. Each of those wagons would contain 10 tonnes. Even given that, the majority of the output went by sea from this pier here, Crossness Pier, the high explosives loading pier. The output of the Arsenal became absolutely staggering. And it's at this period, in 1916, where the Arsenal employed over 100,000 people. Not only were they working in here, the Arsenal also had adjunct factories around here in Abbey Wood. We'll never see another factory like that again. Now we're going to look at the Arsenal gradually dissolving. The first bit to go was in 1952, two little buildings down there. And then in 1955, they were sold off for the extension of Woolwich Power Station. And then the area laid out in the First World War for quick firing ammunition, that went as well. That was sold to the London County Council for use as a trading estate, and its tenant, who they found quickly, was the Ford Motor Company. It made suspensions and steering assemblies for Fords right up until the 1980s. So let's see the Arsenal beginning to decline. That's the first bit to go. That's the 1952 bit up here, the 1955 bit here. Worse is to come. Well, maybe better's to come if you don't really want to be living next door to 30,000 tonnes of high explosive. People were getting very worried about London having a high explosive store within it. The Arsenal hadn't actually made any high explosives since 1918. That area there had been abandoned for all that time. But it was still storing it in great numbers. And as I say, these magazines are capable of carrying up to 30,000 tonnes. So it was then became politically expedient for the government to dispose of all the parts of the Arsenal that were involved in ammunition making. The reason was that the London County Council had planned a new town in Hampshire. And both political parties had worked out that if they gave permission for that new town to go ahead, they would lose the seat at the next election. So they decided they'd kill two birds with one stone. They'd shut this part of the Royal Arsenal, the ammunition, and give it to the London County Council for the building of a new town called Thamesmead. And the result was this. What's left? The engineering part of the Royal Arsenal. It's still working away. It's building tanks, armoured cars, what have you. And the research and development department here. That's mainly working on new types of explosive, but it also does a lot of work which will never be revealed because it did a very large amount of work on nuclear weaponry. Now, in 1967, the Royal Arsenal fails to win an order to build Britain's new armoured personnel carrier, which is currently serving in Ukraine in great numbers. Because it fails to win that order, it's decided to close the Arsenal to manufacturing, and with the loss of 6,700 jobs. And that happens. Woolwich has never recovered from that loss, really, because it wasn't only the 6,700 who went in the Arsenal, there was also something in the region of 6,000 people made redundant at the former Associated Electrical Engineering Company at Charlton at the same time, and the local economy took a near fatal blow. Two bits now. Royal Arsenal East is research and development, still doing what it did before. Royal Arsenal West is now the Ministry of Defence Quality Assurance Directorate. And that's the way it stays until 1994, when it's decided that these buildings are getting too old and it'd be better to start again afresh somewhere else. So the government closes down the Arsenal, and that's what you get in 1994. It's gone. There you go. So that is the end of the Royal Arsenal. But unfortunately, it's not quite the end of the talk, because I haven't yet shown you some more bits of it. We'll go back to the Zenith here, 1920. Now we'll have a quick look at an aerial photograph, but firstly I'd like to get you to think about this pier here, Crossness Explosives Handling Pier, and this little notch here, and that road there. The distance from the end of the pier here to that notch in the boundary there is 0.6 miles. That road there is called Harrow Manor Way. Bear that 0.6 miles in mind for a minute. It was illegal to fly over the Royal Arsenal. Louis Blériot was the first person to cross the Channel. Not long afterwards, another Frenchman thought he could do better. He thought he could fly all the way to London, and he made it. And when he landed, he was arrested. The reason was he'd flown over the Royal Arsenal. The Daily Mail hired a helicopter to photograph a crashed aircraft about there in the 1950s, and the resultant fine nearly broke the newspaper. The ministry was really very, very strict about secrecy in the Arsenal by that time. So the only aerial oblique photos we have are those from Aerofilms Limited, when they're not trying to photograph the Arsenal but trying to photograph something else. And what they photographed a lot was Barking Power Station, which is up there, and also the Royal Group of Docks, which are over there. And this aerial photograph will demonstrate. There we are. There's the plumes from the chimneys of Barking Power Station, and there are the Royal Group of Docks down there. Now, if you can imagine that somebody is photographing the power station up there, it might just catch the top part of the Arsenal in the top 50th of the image or whatever it is. And as a result, what I'm about to show you is very foreshortened. There to the notch there is 0.6 miles. And in this photograph of Barking Power Station, the end of the pier is there and the notch is there. So that's 0.6 miles over that distance there. As for that road I mentioned, it's along there like that. That's Harrow Manor Way. Now here we can see that the Arsenal is pretty bucolic. It's fields. You can see the magazines here and there with their moats and their embankments, and not much else, because you want this area to be fairly uninhabited. You want these magazines to be in isolation, because if one of them blows up, you don't want it to blow up anything else. At the back here, you can see the embankment of the Southern Outfall Sewer, which delineates the southern side of the Royal Arsenal. It got there before the Arsenal did, you see. Now, Harrow Manor Way, this road here. Let's have a look at what it used to look like in 1953. There you are. It's nice, isn't it? Yeah, bucolic. You can see how windswept it is out on those marshes. Trees are bending over. You can just see the sewer embankment in the background. And if you look very closely, you can see a gas lamp there. I'll show you what it looks like right now, courtesy of Google Street View. Not quite so much fun, is it really? No, it's a shame, isn't it? Back into the Arsenal in the 1950s, and try and give you a better idea of what the bucolic area looked like. There you are. The photograph was taken to support an insurance claim, and but you can see it's all used for hay. It's hay fields. There are also some occasionally cattle and sheep rearing as well. But that's what it was used for. The only important thing was that the public couldn't get in. And the Arsenal was surrounded not only by an 8-foot high palisade fence. On the top of that, you had several strands of barbed wire, which were electrified at 300 volts, which did tend to keep people out. Now, that series of photographs of Barking Power Station are not always very clear, but for the sake of completeness, I'll very briefly show them to you, going west from the point that we were already at. You can see the magazines up here, but it's not a very clear photo. So I'll move on to the next one, going further west, which shows the high explosives factory in here and the composition establishment of lots of little buildings here. Now, this is worthy of expanding on. As you can see, we got right into the grain of the photograph here, but you can get a rough idea of what the explosives factory looked like. It's a series of parallel trenches dug into an artificial hill. Up here, you can see the entrance into a tunnel. That's an underground magazine. Well, it's not actually underground, it's on the surface, but earth has been piled up on top of it. All this is made land. This used to be an inlet until 1903, and the spoil is almost certainly out of the Piccadilly and Bakerloo lines, which was dumped here quite usefully. A little bit further in the opposite to the west, here's the composition establishment. Dozens and dozens and dozens of very small buildings, all small, so if one blows up, there isn't enough power in that explosion to take away the building next door. Note that it's got a large boiler house with a chimney here. This will mainly be for the purposes of laundry. At the end of every shift, every single uniform had to be washed of explosives residue. Everybody got covered in this. Explosives turned people yellow, by the way. Exposure to the explosives did cause some deaths, in fact. The amount of laundry that went on in the arsenal is worthy of a book in itself, and it's a shame that there aren't better records of it. Let's see what's in here, what it looked like. There you go. Lots of ladies in their protective gear, either walking on shift or off shift. They're raised off the ground on these walkways. That's to keep everything clean. These are known as cleanways, in fact. They are involved in a chemical process. They're going to put quite sensitive chemicals into shells. There are railway tracks running along all of these. All those tracks are made out of bronze rather than steel, so that there won't be any sparks. And the cost of that was so great that questions were asked in Parliament. Now, the photographs we've just seen weren't very good, so let's look at a vertical one taken in 1946, which gives you a much clearer idea of what the explosives factory looked like. There you are, a series of parallel trenches with various production units sunk next door to them. And here is the composition department with all the cleanways visible going from side to side. Bit of an optical artifact here. It looks as if the railways going into the underground magazines are actually on embankments. In fact, they're in cuttings. There are areas, buried areas here, where ammunition would have been stored. Back to the aerial photographs now, and now thankfully they get a little bit better. Aerofilms are now filming the Port of London Authority at work mending the Royal Group of docks after the damage of the Second World War. But somehow they managed to catch part of the westernmost part of the arsenal in one of them. Now, what's that? That is the Arsenal's sports ground. It's outside of the arsenal. It's still there today. It's in Plumstead. It's just next door to the sidings that go into the Crossrail depot. Here, the arsenal getting ever more dense, almost canyon-like in the middle of it. Narrow roads, great big buildings either side. The research and development department, lots of tiny little magazines, all having very small amounts of very boutique explosives inside them. And some fairly good views of the river frontage, including two cranes. Two piers with cranes on them. Now, when they were taking another photograph of the Royal Docks, I'm afraid that those cranes slipped in. And there we go. These are the two coaling cranes. The Arsenal was a prodigious user of coal, came in from the northeast in ships. And up there, the 200-ton crane that was erected in 1916 to offload the very large naval guns that the Royal Arsenal was making. So that they could be taken to the harbour. It is possible to identify exactly what time this picture was taken, and even without the shadows of the sun to work on, and takes us back to our old friend Raymond Fordham. Ray got the job of rebuilding all the electrics inside these two coaling cranes. This one is being dismantled at the moment. They're electrically driven cranes, so he's pretty much in charge of the job. The Arsenal would have taken all of its coal by rail at this time. So what he does is, as his family live in Plumstead, up near Plumstead Common, when he's ready for dinner, he raised the jib of the other crane. So I know that this is between 12 and 1 o'clock. Right, let's have a look at the other crane in a bit more detail. Steven did some brilliant research on this recently. The crane was dismantled by a contractor from Antwerp who took it away. And as a result, the myth came along that this crane had been sold to Antwerp docks. It hadn't. It had been sold to a shipyard in Denmark. And it lasted until 2003. Wow, yes. So it had a good long life. It's a great shame it didn't last a bit longer. It might have got preserved. You never know. Let's go back to these aerial photographs of the Arsenal. We are in that building there. We're there. Yeah, so that's where we are. You can see a whole array of other buildings, including a very tall one up there. This pier here has now disappeared. This photograph was taken in about 1950. Earlier on, I showed you the hydraulic accumulator tower. There it is. It's quite a tall building. And what we're going to do is we're going to get on top of that hydraulic accumulator tower and look around at the view. There we go. There's the power station. Here's the grand store. That's the old Woolwich power station up there. And now we'll move a little bit to the left, gradually panning round to where we are. There we can see the edge of the Armstrong gun factory, the one with the little red telephone box on the outside of it. Behind it we can see the Shell Foundry, which is no longer there. Behind that you can see the headquarters building, which is still there, building 22. And let's start to move around a bit more. There you can see the ziggurat roof of the Royal Carriage Department, which has been replaced by metallic grey flats, which hopefully look similar. This is the steelworks down here. Here's the Shell Foundry, the steelworks, and here down here is a bit more of the Armstrong gun factory. There's the building 22, the headquarters building. Right, let's turn around a bit further and got a little guessing game here. Is it a gas holder? Skating rink? Any ideas? No? Right. Well, we better go in and find out then, hadn't we? It was always known as the rink in the arsenal, right up to the end of its days. Let's go inside, and there you go. It is the housing of the radial crane. Now, what on earth is this thing? Well, here you can see some tubes coming out of the ground. There's two of them. They are actually the top of wells that go down quite deeply into the ground, probably about 100 foot actually, and they're full of oil. When guns are finished, you want to put them through a process called annealing. This gives them a longer life. They're heated up to near white heat, brought into this building, and then the radial crane will plunge them down into the tube down here, into the well. Now, if you were to plunge them into water, the gun would become very brittle. It would cool very quickly, but by plunging it into oil, it cools less quickly, and this has a very positive effect on the metal. In order to keep up throughput, these arms up here revolve. They go around, they are picking up white hot pieces of gun, dropping them in, they are picking up cooled ones and taking them out. The radial nature of this crane, rotating like this, allows a continuous throughput through this building. At the same time, heating of gun barrels is the way in which they're made. If you were to look at a typical steel gun barrel, think about the ones outside the Imperial War Museum again. It's a series of concentric tubes, one over the outside of the other. And the way that you do it is that you will take the first tube, the inner tube, usually called the A tube. Then you will make the B tube, which will have a slightly smaller inside diameter than the outside of the A tube. You can't slide it over because the interior is too small. So what you do is you heat up the B tube. As it heats, it will expand. And because it will expand, you can lower it over the A tube in a vertical manner. When the B tube cools off, it will grip the A tube like a vice because it is shrunk. This is the way you make a gun. And this again is worthy of a 1.5 hour talk. That shrinking and tempering process is what making steel guns is all about. And that's the way it was for a very long time. But there was to be a revolution in about 1953-54, when along comes the British Oxygen Company. Here we are again in the radial crane house with the new radial crane just about visible there on the left. And the British Oxygen Company has put a tube down into one of the wells and filled it with liquid nitrogen. They've dropped in a tube, to see about shrinking it. Well, these people here are the bigwigs from the Royal Gun Factory, and they've never seen anything like this before. Let's have a look at their faces. You see, some of them are quite surprised, really, aren't they? I find that quite an amusing photograph, actually. That's the way it's done now. It's not done by heating anymore, it's done by freezing and putting each frozen one inside the other. It will then expand back out to its full size, and you get the same effect of a series of tubes, one inside the other, gripping each other with an iron-like vice. Back up onto the hydraulic accumulator tower. We'll turn right the way around and have a look at the Arsenal's gasworks. There it is. There we are, the Arsenal's gasworks, and its brand new 1953-54 retort house. In the background, Barking Power Station on the other side of the river. Not a single building in that photograph survives. Not one. We're going to stand on top of the retort house and we'll look back at where we are now so you can get a better view of the whole thing. There we go. There is the hydraulic accumulator tower. That's where we were standing just now, just at the end of the pointer. There's the rink, the roundhouse, power station, building D81 over there, the tallest building in the Royal Arsenal. Now we'll go over onto the central offices, which are in there, and we'll look back in the direction of the cameraman here to give one last look in this direction. There we go. That's the Shell Foundry gatehouse in front of us, and there is the hydraulic accumulator tower, and there is the rink. This has taken us in a panoramic tour around the Arsenal. There are a few photographs thanks to a man called Richard Cullen, who collected photographs of the Arsenal and did an awful lot of research into it. Unfortunately died a couple of months ago, but his collection was left to us, and so we can now see this. This is one of the ones that Richard got hold of. This is the Royal Arsenal sometime in the late 1950s. And this is the area that's been sold off to the London County Council to make a trading estate which will be used by the Ford Motor Company. It's gradually giving away to housing now. You can see the area at the size of the Arsenal here. It's taken from quite a high height, this one. Next one. There we are. We are now looking over the Arsenal, looking southeastwards, and the building that we are in, we're in here, just there. That's where we are. And there's the Shell Foundry, which is now the park. One more of these, this time showing some of the better known buildings and looking northwards. There we are. We're on here again. We're in here, just there. And there you go. That's the Arsenal. Pretty much in its maximum possible size. No, a little bit's already been sold off there. Now, you'll have noticed that the vast majority of the buildings don't survive any longer. The Arsenal had 1,100 buildings. It's now got around about 25, maybe. However, nearly all of them are listed, so they won't be knocked down. If you look on the other side of the river, there's a row of houses just there. Out of that row of houses, nothing in that photograph survives now. It's all gone. Let's have one last aerial view of the Royal Arsenal, the bit we're in now. There we are, we're just there. And that's taken in 1946. That shows the Arsenal pretty much at its zenith, although there are still some buildings to come in here. That will be built over as well. It's time to leave the Royal Arsenal, and there's no better way of doing it than going out of the main gate. Now, if you look at this photograph, you've got the road, the Plumstead Road coming along here. Greater London Council was determined that this was going to become a dual carriageway. And so they persuaded the Ministry of Defence to let them put it through here, like this. It cut off the tip of the southern tip of the Arsenal, leaving the main gate isolated, which means that the two gentlemen that we're about to see would, if they were there now, be run over. There they are. They're in the middle of the dual carriageway outside of the main gate. That's the back of the main gate, which you now see over the main road. The current gates to the Royal Arsenal are not original. They come from a building which the Greater London Council demolished in the Old Kent Road during the 1960s, I think. Through the gates we go, out to the other side. That is the last time that the gates were closed, actually. It's a Sidney Bacon there, the last chief superintendent of the Royal Arsenal, overseeing the closing of the gates for the very final time. The gate piers here enclose the original piers of the gates to the Woolwich Warren estate, which the Board of Ordnance bought in 1670. So this building on its inside is really quite historic. Here's a picture postcard view of the outside. You all know what that looks like. And in front of here now, £21 million worth of new square. Hasn't been vandalised too badly yet either. Now, if we look in here, see two little plaques. George IV, crest of the Board of Ordnance, and the Board of Ordnance's motto, which, if translated from Latin directly into English, reads, "From Jupiter to those who thunder." Jupiter being the god of war and thunder. Well, that's a bit cumbersome, really. So people who really know about Latin, and I don't, and people in the military always cut it down to the much more manageable "to the warrior arms," which pretty much sums up everything the Royal Arsenal did. And it could also sum up this talk, unless you want the bonus. Let's go for the bonus. You want the bonus, okay. D81. D81 was the tallest building in the Royal Arsenal, and it did the same job as the radial crane. It's taking white-hot gun barrels and dropping them into pits full of oil, only this time on a much grander scale. There's the building as it was when it was built. It is a considerable size, as you can see. It was built in 1916. It was prefabricated. It wasn't made in the Arsenal. Let's have a look at it, what it looked like when it was finished. Well, by finished, I mean about to be demolished. There it is. I think the Greater London Council, who came to buy the land here, did possibly toy with preserving it. Well, it didn't happen, which was unfortunate. But anyway, there it is. Quite good. Let's have a look at the inside. And there you are. That's a large gun being lowered in, well, actually more likely to being pulled out of a pit. The pit will have been full of oil and the gun has now been tempered. Another look at the same process. There we are. And you could use these pits for anything in this building. They weren't only used for tempering by filling them with oil. They were used for such things as chromium plating. They were even used for washing things. That's the interior of one of the pits, and this one, as you can see, is in washing mode. They had quite a few of these pits. A bit more inside the building. There we are. I think someone is lowering another smaller gun into a pit. And in demolition, you can see some of the various pits, wells, whatever. We know a chap called Peter who was involved with the GLC in the demolition of this building, and he said it was a dreadfully difficult job. Eventually they gave up with the demolition in its entirety, and all of these are still there. Only somebody will now have built on top of them. So, you know, one day they might turn up again. That's the sort of thing that came out of it on the Royal Arsenal Railway. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is that. Thank you for listening.